Jim, I'll let you take it away, and then we will be monitoring the chat. Folks, if you guys have questions, please feel free to ask. So Jim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aakash. Thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah, the topic is reopening, and I've talked on this extensively, so please ask questions at will. Don't fret if you interrupt me. I can pick up where I left off. These are definitely some very trying times that have affected every single individual, in one way or another. But specifically for businesses, they're having to do something that they've never had to do before, which is, reopen after effectively pulling the plug out of the socket for 30 days, which has obviously put a cramp on cash flow. And now on top of that, in order to reopen, they're having to add major constraints to the operation itself. Business was hard enough before all of this hit, and now with constraints that we're facing, it's making it almost impossible. So there's really a catch-22 to reopening that businesses are facing, and I'm going to talk about that in detail and what can be done about it. The catch-22 is that a business really has to attract customers back and give them confidence that they're a safe space to come to, with that promise in mind. And in order to gain that customer confidence, business has to implement the kind of something along the lines of the CDC guidelines around avoiding, the spread of COVID. And that's in the form of obviously masking and hand cleaning, but more specifically around distancing, which is the real catch-22, right? If they limit the occupancy based on CDC guidelines, now they have capacity restrictions that make it hard to make money. So I'm going to be talking today about how to overcome that constraint in very specific detail and step-by-step manners that can be taken by any business that wants to reopen. My name is Jim Hudson, and I am a lean management expert. I've spent my whole career really trying to figure out what Japan was doing to compete against us with high quality. Before I did any of that, I went to West Point. I was in the second class that had women in it, something that was a pretty smart move on the Army's part, as well as any of the other service academies. I went on to serve 7 years in the Army, and about the time I was getting out, Japan had this moniker of Japan Inc. That basically said the Japanese were producing much better quality than we were, and I wanted to find out what it was they were doing, and I found out ultimately that it was Toyota and something called lean management, systems management, that was driving the train on their higher quality. But more importantly, when people think about that, they generally tend to think that it's about efficiency, and what it really boils down to is just managing better, managing in a systemic way that sets targets and then solves problems that are in the way of those targets through the use of the people that work at the company, specifically those who are actually doing the work. And I've got this picture up here of these guys that had completed a workshop, and you can see on the left-hand side there, they're all smiling, they're all jazzed after this workshop because they have used their own creative intelligence and thinking to solve a really thorny issue for the company. And they were just elated. And just as a side note, the guy that's got his arm around the guy on the left there worked for a manager that was a real firefighter. And that manager wanted to stop us. He basically wanted us not to be able to implement. And this kid went back and talked about some of the things that they had done and kind of shifted everything around. So my interest in lean has been that it has allowed the workforce to kind of bring not just their hands, but their brains and their hearts to work. I've had people stop me and say, I just wasn't able to shine the way I can shine doing these kinds of things here. So as we look at applying this now to the reopening issue, once I saw some of the things that were going on, I recognized right away that there is this catch-22, right? If I want to gain customer confidence, I have to put in some things that are designed around constraining people from mingling and from breathing on each other, and at the same time, I'm hurting myself in my efforts to run the business because I don't have the capacity that I had before. And then on top of all that, you can see down at the bottom there, it's an issue of having to enforce compliance of any of the guidelines. So I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place in that the more I put the constraints in, the more I have to enforce compliance and hurt my business, or I ignore the constraints and allow people to make their own decisions and ultimately come in and deal with it on their own, right? Which is a big ask. It's a big ask of the employees that you have. This is a picture of Target where an employee was trying to enforce some compliance and ended up in a scuffle that led to his arm breaking. In at least 3 states, there have actually been shootings, one of which ended in a fatality. So we've got issues that are revolving around the whole compliance deal, and we don't have to have those. That's exactly what I'm talking about today, is how do we avoid those compliance issues altogether by doing some of the things that we could be doing. If you are one of the people who think that this is not a real crisis, then I don't want to argue anything, but I do want to say that in the last 20 years, we've had 5 cases of things that could have led to pandemic, from SARS to swine flu to all the way up to Ebola. And the mortality rates on some of those have been very high, like as high as 50%. So, if we don't do anything else but just consider this to be a trial run, we're going to be dealing with pandemics in the future, just based on the fact that people have higher mobility and the population is growing. So this isn't a one-off. We're not going to have to wait another 100 years to see something. We're going to have to deal with this. So regardless of where you land, this is something that can be done for now and for the future. The basic thing that I'm saying here is you can do all of them. You can be profitable and you can be CDC compliant while gaining customer trust because of that, and make it very, very visually easy for people to know that they're being taken care of in terms of some of the guidelines, and also at the same time really avoid the compliance related hassles that are coming out of some of these issues. There is a lot of information out there. The city of Tampa has put out Lift Up Local. The airport has a program. All kinds of guidelines out there from Florida State, from the government. And the problem with all of these is that they're addressing the what, but they're not really addressing the how, right? We're asking for behavior change, and we're telling people what we want to do, but to reopen, in order to reopen, but we're not really telling them how. And you can see here in this example, I think this is a bar in Maryland where they just, implemented these large customers refused to do this. At a 10,000-foot view, what we're trying to do here is provide some detection before somebody enters the premise of a business, for temperature. And I think this thing costs like $70. There's some more extensive things that exist, like a walkthrough system. I personally was in Asia at a time when swine flu hit, and frequently was walking through airports where they had these scanners in place, and I didn't even know it. Right? It was not an issue for me because I saw 2 people standing there. I saw them ready to stop people that didn't pass the scan, but for me it was just walk through and not worry about it. If somebody at this stage wanted to put something in place, I have a suggestion that if a retail location is in a high density spot, then it's possible to maybe put a tent outside where that's common to the area, and allow some of the other retailers to mitigate some of the cost, and have people then go through that tent in order to get checked, and maybe get a card or a tag or something that's visual that allows a retail store in that area to know that this person has been checked. That's if that were the case where somebody doing reopening wanted to involve that. The second thing that is part of the what we're trying to do is prevent. So we want to detect anybody that is an obvious carrier or has a high temperature, but then we want to prevent people from, if they're asymptomatic, from being able to spread to each other. And then thirdly, we want to protect those people that might have a compromised immune system. So those are the 3 big things that we're really trying to do. And the method itself is a 3-step piece. So it's basically architecting the flow, of people inside the company, inside the business, looking at the customer touch points to see what we can do with those in a way of either getting rid of them or decreasing the length of time it takes to transact. And then thirdly, putting in something visual that serves to manage compliance. And I'll say this later on, but really all we're trying to do is get the best possible flow that we can get with the least amount of touch points so that the speed of people coming through the operation increases, and lock that in visually. And that's really what we're after here. In step one in architecting the flow, we're going to look at customer flow. What are the customers doing? What do we want them to do? In the case of people that are either wanting to comply versus those that are not, can we have separate flows set up for those so that when they enter the premises, they're immediately given the choice of going one way or another, and knowing that they've got some kind of safety in place if they want that or not. And that's the piece that really gets, takes the onus off the business to enforce who's going where. On the second piece here, the employee flow, we want to look at, what are the employees doing? If you walk into a restaurant and you see the employees in the back that are, not distancing and not masked, then the immediate question has to be, what's keeping them from transmitting if they're asymptomatic or even if they are symptomatic to some extent. My son works at Chipotle. He's 17 years old. He called in at one point with a cough, and there was a discussion on whether or not he should come in. That, from my perspective, should have been kind of a no-brainer. Now they did end up saying stay at home, but from my perspective, it should have been no. If there's anything at all that indicates a problem, don't even think about it. The third thing that you see up here for the flow piece, where where the employees are actively going through, looking at what the flow is the air itself. What is the air conditioner or the heater doing to push air through? Because that's been shown to be a factor in transmitting, the distance with which some of the germs can go. It wasn't really a study, but one case showed that an infected group at one table was transmitting to the neighboring tables just because of the way that the air conditioner flowed. So that's a piece that we want to actually look at and figure out how to do. So the second piece is to reduce the customer touch points, right? And obviously that starts with identifying them. How are the touch points going? And then is there something we can actually do to lower the speed of those touch points? And so I've heard from people that if they're going to restaurants these days, one of the things that is happening is the use of technology is allowing people to get rid of menus that they order on the iPhone instead of having to look at a menu, a hard copy menu, and touch it. B, then they go to get the bill, it's just a scan instead of an actual bill. And I personally, throughout these last weeks, have gone to several places that were doing curbside service. At one of them, there was a 4-point touch. And obviously I look at this from a lean perspective, but the initial touch point was that the owner came out to ask who I was, right? I had ordered online, came out to ask who I was, went back in, then came out with the receipt for me to scan the credit card as if it were, as if I had sat in the business. And of course I didn't want to touch the folder with the receipt in it, but didn't have an option here. I put the credit card in, gave it to her. She came back a third time with my credit card and the receipt. And then a fourth person came out and put the food into the trunk. So when we're looking at what we're trying to do to get the touch points out, it's not rocket science, obviously, but it's something that we want to address, right? And then in terms of speed, I saw this guy running a restaurant. Now he's obviously trying to be very compliant, and he is moving furniture out, right? He's, in order to meet the occupancy restrictions, he's moving physical furniture out. And that's a mistake. He doesn't have to move the furniture out. He could basically use visual cues to indicate which tables are open. But then as a table becomes vacant from somebody having sat there, move people to a clean table, move those who are waiting to a clean table, and have the staff clean up the dirty table while other things are going on. And this is just one example of how to speed things up. But when you look at it through the glasses of flow, right, keeping the customers coming through, then you don't want them standing there if you have limited capacity, waiting for a table to be clean so that it can be opened. You want that flow to happen automatically. And so if he had left his furniture there and just limited the capacity visually, that would have allowed him to have more speed of people coming in and out of the service. And like I said, that's one kind of a thing that would be looked at in order to reduce the touch point itself, right? That place where people are. And so when I talk about, making up for the reduced occupancy and still being able to make money, we're looking at ways to get the flow to speed up so that we're doing things faster. And that ultimately is what makes up for the capacity. So the third thing then is to put things into, lock the flow that we architect visually in, right? And so we're using the fastest flow that the employees can come up with. They know what it is. And again, because of their creative thinking, when you prompt them to come up with ways to make things go faster and reduce touch points and just generally get people through the business faster, they will rise to the challenge when you ask. And so once you have that, now you want to apply visuality to the procedures, right? Now, this is obviously an example where they have barricaded in a large open space. I just put it on there because I thought it was an interesting way to deal with guiding, but it doesn't have to be this extreme. I think those are probably, blow up barriers from the looks of it, but there's all kinds of different ways to get people directed visually in a way that makes it readily apparent. What am I supposed to do, and where am I doing it at? And so I want to talk about visuality for a second, because it's an important part of how we operate as humans, right? 50% of our brain goes down toward visual processing, and we do stuff faster when we see it, right? You can see over here that our learning is 300% faster when we're using visual mechanisms than it is through our other senses. And that is an important piece, because I want to be able to transmit information in an instant, and I can do that visually, right? That is the way to go. So in a large part, again, what we're really trying to do is get to that point where we can apply creative visual solutions that end up making it easy for people to navigate, right? I don't have to enforce compliance anymore. It's easy to do because it's self-explaining, it's self-directing, and it's self-regulating, just like the streets that we navigate every day are, right? You don't ask questions about stopping at stop signs. You don't ask questions about taking right turns after you've stopped, or using the lines and the signs that are out there to tell you what to do. And so that's something that we want to start thinking about, is how do we apply that kind of visuality to the inside as well as we're doing it from the outside. The self-explain piece, this is a runway on an airport, and those lines right there are the lines that fit the size of the airplane, right? You can see over here on the left that these are airplane denominations, and what happens is that's where the front wheel goes, right? The person guiding them in puts the front wheel on that line, and then they know that they can move the gate correctly. They don't have to, again, designed around speed. They know they don't have to mess around with the gate, that they can pull it right up and it's right where it belongs. And so, it's self-explaining to the extent that anybody walking along can see it. You can see the red lines also there to indicate, hey, do not park anything in this area. This is an important area that we're going to move the gate up to. And this is what it looks like without it, right? If you don't have all these visual cues in place, you have an information deficit, which means that people can negotiate, right? If we didn't have the signs outside, the lights, every intersection would be a negotiation. And the time it took to drive from point A to point B would be much higher. So visuality is the way to get around that. It's self-explaining, it is self-directing. Here's an example of somebody that put down carpet and doesn't, there's no question to be asked here, right? When you're within 6 feet. I had somebody tell me 6 feet is one thing to one person and something different to another. We want to get the subjectivity out, and we do that with visuality that that comes in place. And again, this is just one single example. People will create easy, navigatable things that are visual and that tell customers what they do, what they want to do. And every business is different. So you're really wanting, you can go out and take some examples that you see and implement them, but they don't incorporate the business's specifics around what our customers do in here, what they're doing, what we want them to do, and ultimately how we want them to interact with us. And then finally, they're self-regulating, right? Once stuff is in place, people tend to, once visual things are in place, people tend to want to fill that void. I personally have seen instances where we took something that was, unmarked, took a bin that was unmarked where cut parts went into, started labeling slots, and within 60 seconds of labeling a slot, somebody came over and put something in there. The human brain wants to put things where they belong, and they want to do things in a way that works. So the visuality here serves to get people to kind of, self-regulate is what it says. So that's pretty much the gist of the procedure, right? I basically have listed out these 3 steps. The platform is detection, prevention, and protection, and the gist of the protocol is architect the flow, get the touch points down to a minimum, and speed up the flow of the people in the business, and then finally lock that in so that you get some compliance around it.
Jim, this is Aakash, can you talk about, if people want more information on the depths of each step, what resources they can get on the?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I am publishing a book on this, but the company runs what's called a reopening blitz, where we go through the protocol, and we do that regularly. So companies, we're trying to do as many companies as we can. So we've kept the price down to a real minimum, but we're basically walking through examples of implementing this protocol at a company and having the ability for others to watch through what amounts to a television show of, where one of the coaches is speaking to the camera about what the steps are and what it looks like on site, and then what it could look like at the place of business. So we run those frequently, and if you go to the website here, safernation.net, you'll find more information on it.
Jim, with that airflow, you said that wasn't necessarily a study, but when you start talking about redirecting the airflow in some of these locations, I mean, is there enough information there to start justifying redirecting the air ducts in the building? That seems pretty
well. It was something where I think early on in China, in a Chinese restaurant, they just happened to have tracked 75 people in the restaurant, and so they knew, by watching what the effects were, who got infected and who didn't. And the suggestion was that because the air conditioner had pushed in 2 directions, one away from the table and one bouncing back toward the table, that was the case. But it's not scientific from the standpoint of having done 20 of these, right, which would be a statistical sample, a minimum. But yeah, that was basically what those that were looking at it were suggesting, was that we want to take into account where the air is going, and that shields or guards or something would allow us to at least redirect the flow in a direction that didn't spread as massively as if we just left it and didn't do anything, right? What I see is that everybody is talking about this. I originally, the capacity issue came up on John Taffer's show with Bar Rescue. And he obviously is in the bar arena, but he broke down all the costs. He broke down all the different things that bar owners have to face, and said, if I can't seat someone at the bar and I can't bring in more than 25% of the people, I've got handcuffs. I've got profitability handcuffs that I just can't overcome. And I sat there and immediately went, oh no, that's not true, right? We do not have permanent capacity. Right? You don't have permanent capacity in any, not just in a retail operation, but in any operation. And that's the basis of all lean thinking, is that we can actually go and create things that bring capacity to us instead of having to go out and buy it. And so I saw that and said immediately, this is a way If you combine those two things where the thinking around the capacity is in place, especially with employees, once you get them doing it, man, you're letting the cat out of the bag, and they'll keep doing it. But you lock that in with visuality, you've got a 1-2 punch that is very, very powerful. Ashley, I'm so grateful that you allowed me this time to present. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. I just quickly wanted to remind you, if you do have questions or comments, don't forget to unmute yourselves. But yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. And I know our members and their guests appreciate it too. So I'll just leave just another minute if anybody has any questions or comments, and then we'll log off here.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, if you do have questions that you come up with later on, my email is jim@safernation.net, or you can call that number and they'll track me down. I will answer any and all questions and provide any kind of information you want. If you know someone that's in the reopening, please send them over to the site. We want to open 20,000 businesses, so we really are trying to do something to get the economy jump started, and it's just too painful to see people saying that they've got these handcuffs on and can't do anything about it, when in fact there are steps we can take. Thank everybody for their interest. I really appreciate the attention, and I hope it was helpful. Hope you got something out of it.
Thank you, Jim. That was awesome. That was Victoria. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right. Have a great afternoon.
All right, Jim. Bye. Thank you, Akash.
Thank you, Akash.
No problem.